First off, guys, thanks for the questions. Here with a friend of mine, Jonathan, and we're at the gym. Just had a bit of a circuit, did some kettlebell swings, squats, goblet squats, some abs, so feeling good. And I've decided to answer a bunch of questions for you guys. So one of the questions I got was how to form a brotherhood from scratch. Like, how does a guy go about it? I think it's a good question. I think it's a lot of what's missing in man currently. I think everyone wants to be a part of a network or a tribe. I think that brothers together, they can accelerate each other. So I think it's a great question you're asking. And how to do it. First off, for guys, you have to become a brother. You have to have good morals yourself. Like, you have to have a good work ethic. You should start going to the gym and being physical, working hard. And then you should start to look at other guys that are around in that area and they're doing the same things you are, like they have the similar values to you. The values are alike, they collide together. For me, I remember when I was personal training at the gym, I had a guy there work behind the counter, and I could see, like, that our values and things like that did line up. And I'd go talk to him, we'd start training together, and then eventually we would do some business together, and we'd become brothers, good friends. We're maybe not the best friends now, but that's 10, 15 years, these things happen. But at the time, good brothers. So for me, it's just, you have to find guys, like friends, where the values line up. For you, that might be the boxing gym, that might be at work, that might be at a fitness gym. Generally at places that things are hard, you can walk around the gym and see guys that have a similar work ethic to you just based on how they train. You might see a guy doing heavy deadlifts, so he's like pushing himself. He might not be the strongest guy, but he has a good work ethic. You can see things, qualities in him that you're like, yeah, that's something that I can connect with. It's a big strength of guys now is if you can walk up to someone and give them respect, like talk to them. I've said it before, with guys, I've made some of the best connections that I've made when I had nothing. Was just walking up to one guy specifically in the gym and just talking to him. I remember I talked to him, I said, I've been, like, I know what you're into, like I know the business that you're into, going to take you out to lunch sometime. And we went to lunch and I ended up making a ton of money out of that sort of arrangement and meetup that we had, with that connection. I think with guys, generally they're more concerned with chasing pussy, like, running after girls and getting numbers and exchanging numbers to try and have sex. And a lot of the time they should be trying to find friends, like brothers, specifically if they don't have many of them yet. Once you have one or two, once you have a brother or two, you can kind of join together and find more. It's easier. It's like, a network effect. The chain, once you add one link to it, it's easier to continue adding links to it. But it all starts and ends with you being a brother. Like, you have to have attributes and qualities to you that make someone else's life better. Like, you have to become a team player. I think if you were playing sports and things like that in school or after school, sports is a good way to meet potential brothers too, because again, you see those attributes in them that you think, oh, well, this guy could make a good friend. But no, that's my take on that one. All right, I've got a good question come through. What's my thought on how a guy can increase his emotional intelligence? And it's a good question. I see a lot of guys in the Twitter or YouTube or sort of the space, it's a computer space, in the sort of tech world, and they're more focused on their IQ than understanding emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is how your actions make other people feel. Like, it's your perception of how other people are in the room. If I do this, how does that person feel? I find that in general, a lot of guys, in those sort of tech spaces can be a bit autistic, where they don't really understand that their actions have a reaction on someone else. It's much like the saying goes, like, for every action there's an equal or opposite reaction. Like, you have to be calibrated. You have to be able to understand, like, how your actions are affecting a girl or how your actions are affecting, a friend. If you do and say things, like, it's not just you, it sort of rubs off on everyone, and their perception of how you are gets warped. It's not a good thing. I think that how you can increase your emotional intelligence is, I think it's more on the creative sphere. It's more on thinking like how you feel inside. Like, maybe you're, before you go to bed each night, you try and write, like what I do, I'll write poetry some nights. I'll write, like, short stories, or I'll write down like I'll sit in a quiet room and I'll write down sort of how I feel in that moment. You know, something will happen during the day or something like that, and I won't address it at the time. But then maybe before I go to bed, I sit down and try to like sort of listen to myself inside. I think that a lot of us get very like, you know, autonomous almost, like robotic during the day, where we can lose track of what we're doing. You know, we just go into like automated mode. You know, sometimes for me, like I'll go to the gym and it just feels completely automated. And then sometimes maybe I'll do pull-ups and I'll try to focus on the exercise, like focus on the muscle working or focus on that movement. Just stay a bit grounded. I think emotional intelligence is just part of being connected with yourself. You know, for some of you that might be like boxing. Boxing is a way to increase your connection to yourself because you have to move in sync. Like you have to move in harmony, so you have to feel the movement. Like you have to move your hips, your legs, everything has to move at once. I think another thing for guys is like, you know, what I've done before after I got out of prison, I did Bikram yoga for a while. I did that for about 6 months. And a lot of that is about being grounded and sort of like connected to yourself and focusing on the movement. You know, when you're doing yoga and it's quite quiet, even if there are people around, it's very hard there are no distractions. You know, you have to focus on like, you know, you're feeling the muscle like stretching and feeling everything that's working. So you're feeling like, you know, you're building that connection with yourself. I think, and then emotional intelligence is just, you know, you think of, if I do X, how's that going to make the other person feel? Looking at people and trying to understand what they're thinking. You know, like maybe you're walking around the city or something and you're seeing people in dispute or something's happening and you're trying to put yourself in sort of their shoes and how you would respond to that. I think that it can be for some guys, you know, guys will focus on non-fiction and all that sort of stuff, you know, living like a very logical life. A lot of what they'll watch on TV, if they watch TV at all, it's very serious stuff. I think for having good emotional intelligence, maybe you have to watch or read books that are like, you know, might be more romantic or more like fiction based or things like that. I think for some guys, you know, fantasy can be it really seems to be one or the other. Guys are really focused on fantasy and very turned off from the reality, or guys are completely living their life like kind of a non-fiction book. Like they're very focused on just work, just logical tasks every day, and can end up being kind of like cold and robotic, and then it's hard to get calibrated again. Like it's hard to be connected to people, and it's also going to be harder to relate to people. But the biggest ROI now, I would say, is not so much logic, because we all have phones and things like that. So if I need something solved, I have a tool in my pocket that's more powerful than the mind of anyone on the planet. So I think that it's more that, like EQ, like emotional intelligence, because if you have high emotional intelligence, you can sell, you can market, you can put yourself in the shoes of the consumer, you know, so that's a big thing. You know, I think that, it's just the connection to oneself. I think that's a big part of EQ, like emotional intelligence, is that you can feel feelings and like address them and things like that. I think that that's a big part of what's missing in guys. Like I see a lot of guys in the red pill space and things like that, and they lean completely into their logic. But life is like, there's a lot of nuances to life, and logic doesn't really solve everything, especially when you start talking about women and things like that. Like they're quite illogical. So you need a high level of emotional intelligence. And a lot of emotional intelligence, I think, is about being able to express feelings that you might not necessarily feel. You know, like people will expect to see certain things from you, and if they don't see it, they'll think that you're uncalibrated. You know, if a girl or something does something and you're just completely stoic and don't respond at all, like that's difficult. Like that's not calibrated. Like that's not the way to live, I don't think. And it's not a nice way to live. You know, it's good to be able to just show things, you know, show that you have something in you. And that's also how people connect to you. You know, like no one's going to be able to connect to that logical stoic Terminator or the logical stoic guy, because he doesn't really convey emotions or flaws or things like that. And a lot of the way that people can connect is through friction. You know, so if things are too fluid, they're too smooth, it's very difficult to connect to you. Like, you know, often through the inadequacies and like, you know, shortcomings, and people can see you as human. Like you might have a reaction that's not great, but that's what bonds people together. You know, if you're too, it's like the same. It's like if you're Teflon, nothing sticks to you, but nothing good will stick to you either. So I think emotional intelligence is very necessary. And that comes with being able to accept that you have emotions and you can express them. You know, I'm not saying express it and that you get violent or something like that, but you can tell people if they piss you off, and you can tell people, you know, if you don't like that. Or if you do like that, you know, I see some guys with girls, they won't be able to express sort of what's in their heart. And that's like a fear, that's a scarcity base, but that's not natural. It's not natural to not be able to tell people, like compliment people and things like that. That's often just come from a damaged position. Like a lot of these logical guys and things like that, they're only like that because they're hurt, like inside. They don't want to express what's in there because now it's real. Like if I tell someone how I feel and they reject me, now that's painful. Like that hurts more. It's easier for me to just pretend that I don't give a fuck. And then by not caring about anything though, it's very, like you're very replaceable. Like you haven't put your like heart on the line, you haven't put your cards down. And it's the same with friends. It's not just all relatable back to women, it's the same with friends, the same with business. If you have staff, you have to have a high EQ, which means you have to be able to express your emotions. Because that's what's going to get the work out of them. You know, it's going to make them be like, I like my boss, or I don't like my boss, but I respect him. So you have to be able to express what's in your heart. Which means that you have to be able to connect with them as well. Because when you have staff, they'll have things going on and things like that. You have to be able to identify it, but also deal with it. And a lot of the staff will have personal problems and things like that, especially once you start to get a lot of them. So you have to be able to identify it and get the best out of it. So that's my take on that one. I got a question to come through. What do I think of PulseChain, PulseX, and Richard Hart in general? I think in general, I think Hex, so it has to all originate back to there. I actually know a guy that made 9 figures in Hex, so he made a couple $100 million. So got in very early and then held through. I think he staked, so he kind of had to hold a large percentage of it, and he made a fuck ton of money. And he's living very good now, and he's very thankful to Richard Hart. I think Richard Hart in general, I think he's a brilliant marketer. I think he's obviously incredibly intelligent. I think that I've known about him sort of back when he used to do the Bcash stuff with Roger Ver. I think he confronted Roger or something about SegWit or something like that as well, when they were changing to the bigger blocks on Bitcoin. I knew then, once I saw him talk, that he was very intelligent. I think Richard Hart was quite early on Bitcoin. I think that he's obviously got very good foresight. I think he's very much a master in game theory. I think he understands human psychology, which is kind of how they've structured Hex and made it so profitable. I think he knows sort of how to get the most out of people. This lighting's not bad, light just went on. Yeah. But yeah, I think he knows how to get the most out of people. I think he's a very good thinker. I think he's made a product that kind of was designed to go up. You know, I'm not going to speculate on how much Hex he holds. Like if he was in fact the early Hex whales recycling his Ethereum through that. I mean, I have my theories, but I don't know for sure. And none of that really matters in the end, I guess, because he's still, you know, the early adopters made a shit ton of money, which was a good thing. I think that, yeah, like I said, he's very intelligent. I don't think he's a perfect guy, obviously, who is. But I think that he's done much of what he said. You know, he said that he would create Hex that would become a valuable investment. And I think that it's done very well. You know, it's done all of it that he promised that it would. I don't think it's a scam, because to me a scam, it has to be, you know, you have to promise X and then you don't deliver that. That's a scam. If you promise X and you deliver X, it's not so much what the money, you know, what the token's worth, but you bite in large, delivered on your promise. And that's part of why, you know, PulseChain went out in PulseX. I sacrificed for PulseX. I put 75K in. I don't even know what it's worth. You know, I sacrificed on the first day. I haven't even checked. I think that it's up, but I'm bullish on the project to a degree because it's deflationary, PulseX, but I'm not going to claim that I'm some, you know, Richard Hart maximalist, or that I know everything that he does, or like, you know, that PulseChain is just going to change the world. I have no PulseChain, I just have PulseX. I think that from what I've seen with PulseChain, he delivered on his promise of the product. You know, that the network works, it's, I would say, extremely centralized, but it does work, you know, much like it was advertised, which is a good thing. And PulseX, from what I've seen, does work as well, which was a good thing. You know, I'll check the product later, but when I put 75K in, to me it was more of an all or nothing thing. You know, I wasn't getting into it to flip it or dump it on the first day or something like that, because it's something I put 75K in and I'll just see where it goes. You know, I said to myself that I would hold it for at least a year after launch, and I'll just see what happens. I saw when Hex first launched, I remember I was right there, and I saw that it dropped about 50% in the first month. Like the token price essentially created, and then it obviously went like 1000x or something from there. So I'm not gonna, be something that sells very early. I think that it's got a great community behind Hex, and I assume they're now moving to PulseX and PulseChain. I think that that's a good thing. I think the community is much like a network effect. It gives a bunch of people that are able to speak up for the project and kind of defend it. And I think with Hex, they're incentivized to defend it because a lot of them are staked, some of them for a very long time. So they have to, they have to defend it, otherwise their token may be worthless. So it creates almost like an army that can protect the project and sending their energy to make sure the token succeeds. I think, like I said, Richard Tart's very intelligent. I think that he's built products that work. And I think that, I'll see what happens with the PulseX. I'm not someone telling you to buy it or something like that. Like I said, I sacrificed on the first day. I don't even know what it's worth now. I haven't looked, but I'll hold it for at least 12 months. And that's my take. I'm not more bullish on, if someone told me, would you be, I actually had a friend of mine ask me the other day, because some of them are very much Hex maximalists. And they told me, would you hold Hex or Ethereum? And I think Hex is more just like a higher beta play on Ethereum. I think, if Ethereum goes up 2x, maybe Hex goes up like 5x or something like that. But there is obviously more risk. To me, there's more risk with Hex than Ethereum. That's my sort of take. I think that if someone told me what I would rather hold, it would be Ethereum. And when someone turns around and tells me, they have 5 or 10% of their portfolio on Hex, I can understand that. That's just a product that they really believe in. And I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing. I think Richard's proven track record of success, which means something. He's got a proven record of looking after the early investors. I don't really like all this flexing, this running around buying all this shit and showing it off, but that seems to be a strategy, like a marketing thing. It does get attention, it gets eyes on him. So, good luck to him. I've got another good question, lads. I got one from a 17-year-old. He said that he's just finishing school and what should he do to make money? What fields should he look into? And for me, I've changed my mind on what guys should do at 17. I'm more of the sort of scope that guys should try to get incredibly fit at that age, because a lot of their time doesn't really matter. When you're 17, 18, 19, even 20, any job that you could do, you're not going to get paid fuck all. You're not going to get paid much. So even if you're doing a job and you're in the first world and maybe you're working for $12 or $14 an hour, yes, you're building your resolve in a point that it is shit. To be on the fries at McDonald's, which I have done, it sucks. You're building your resolve in a shit job. But I think the best ROI is going to be getting incredibly fit at that time. Being in the boxing gym, training hard, exhausting yourself hard, going to the gym, maybe you warm up on the treadmill with 20 or 30 minutes of runs, sprints, and then you go and do a kettlebell circuit and burn yourself completely out for an hour and a half. And then you box as well on top of that. You box in the morning or something like that. You're training nearly every day. I think that once you get to a high level of fitness, 1 or 2 years, you can get to a high level for boxing, sparring and things like that. You can kind of cruise for the rest of your life. I see a lot of guys that were athletic in their 20s and they gain time in the future because they're not 30 or 35. Now they make good money, but they're trying to get their physique back or try and learn to box or all this other stuff. That's a lot harder now. It's a lot easier to learn and get when you've never been fat, when you've had a good body and good shape. It's easier to maintain. Much like Jonathan said before, the fat cells, once you've gained them, they don't disappear. They just wait to be refilled, which sort of sits with you forever. So once you've been fat, it's a lot easier to be fat again. With me, I was fat in my, up to probably 19 or 20. I used to play Counter-Strike professionally. So I was a fat fuck. And with me, if I eat garbage, my stomach just blows out. I can gain and be big, yes, but I have to watch my diet now because I gain fat just as easy as I gain muscle. So I could easily blow up to 100, 110 kilos, in a few months if I wanted to. I would be big, but I would be fat too. So I have to watch that for the rest of my life. Versus if I just never got fat, I wouldn't have to worry about that at all. So that's going to be my first scope of the focus, just build your body up, get very fit, very strong, build your discipline and your resolve. You go into the gym in the morning to do boxing when it's a shit time, you don't want to do it. And then it'll be on top of that, starting to learn some high income skill, but I would be still nominating most of my mental process onto fitness and boxing and things like that. I'll get very high level at that. But then with what time you have left, yes, I would be learning a high income skill. I would be learning a skill, and then I would be learning what I have a fucking aptitude in. For me, I have a good aptitude in investing with money. I understand money, I understand investing, I understand how to multiply money. I've always been like a hustler and stuff like that. Like I've always liked the process of taking a pile of money and just multiplying it however the fuck I can, which has got me in trouble in the past, but that's a big motivator of mine. I've always been good with money, at making it. I'm not really good at spending it. I mean, I've always liked to spend money, but I am good at investing and things like that. So I have a good aptitude with numbers and things like that. But you might be good with people, and then you can move into sales, move into marketing, move into like high ticket sales is a big thing now. I would be looking into, if I had an aptitude in tech, I would be looking into tech. I think that's a big thing for the future. But for the guys who are good with their hands, like maybe their dad was in some specific field, I would be looking into that. I think a lot of guys miss tricks because their dad doesn't push them into one field. Like what their dad knows kind of dies with their dad. Like their dad might be, a boilermaker or something like that. And rather than he teaches his son the trade, like, when he's in his early teens, he turns school down and instead he turns up the trade, which would be a much higher ROI than sitting in school or something like that. Like that education and what the dad has learnt through his experience kind of dies with the dad, and the son's just starting at zero, learning a completely new field, kind of lost. I think that's a foolish thing that happens in the West. The dad doesn't really groom the kid for any sort of success, like kind of just grooms them to be a free spirit and learn completely from zero. I think that's a fucking bad thing. That's much the same thing that happened to me. I was always could always do like push with the freedom thing, like whatever you decide, just go with. And when you're left to your own device, like it's like the Netflix. You turn Netflix on, you can't pick a movie. It's much like that. Versus if you only have a couple of directions, it's a lot easier to go in one direction and get great at that direction. If you're learning from someone who's experienced, like if your dad's in one field and he teaches you everything he knows, that's the best avenue. I think that's the best avenue too when you eventually have sons and daughters of your own. Like I think the dad's job is to just push everything that he learned in life and refine it through his kids. It's a very lost art, but that is how you get incredibly powerful and how you get to be great. Like that's how greatness is pushed through. It's generational. Instead of all that wisdom and stuff that the father learned and all of the trade skills and things like that, because you can learn it in a book. You can learn engineering and things like that, but if your dad's an engineer, he can teach you how it is on the ground. Like he can connect you to all of these people that he knows, like his connections, which matter more than education. So yeah, I think it's generational, and I would be looking that when you eventually have kids, whatever skill it is that you master, I am going to assume that you're starting from kind of zero, much like I did. Like your dad hasn't pushed you in one specific direction. So I think that when you eventually have kids yourself, you can change that sort of trend. And that's my take. Got another question from a lad. He said, what do I think about him purchasing an apartment to live in? So not for cash flow or investment or anything like that. And for me, it's just going to be a pretty simple answer. It just depends if you can afford it, what your cash flow is. I'm not one of those guys like, some of these nerds will not really understand that you can still purchase a property and live in it. If it's real estate's kind of like a safety hedge to me. Like I have multiple houses. I mean, I've sold a couple back in Australia, but I still have a couple there. And bricks and mortar, it's still a safe, a safe place to park your money. It's still a good hedge against inflation. If you're making good money where the cash doesn't really matter to you, let's say that an apartment's 600K. And so you're going to put 600K in an apartment. And that doesn't make sense if you're making 60K a year. But if you're making great money, making $1 million a year or 500K a year or something like that, it matters. It still can be worthwhile. It's just going to depend on your financial situation and what it is that you want. It's this money that you're moving into it that you have a massive excess of. Have you had an inheritance or something like that? Or did you just make great money? I don't think it makes sense to buy an apartment if you're taking on a ton of debt that you have to service now. Because it's not really going to get you ahead. If you're having to pay back the bank and pay interest and things like that on something that doesn't really generate any cash flow. And it's not just to say that, you would have to rent that anyway. So to a degree, with the rates that where they're at now, I don't think that it makes financial sense. I think that if you could have locked in rates at like 2%, after COVID, something like that, that makes sense because you're paying 2% back interest. You would be paying much the same as what you were renting. So with inflation, you would actually be gaining money. See, that's what people don't tell you. If you're buying let's say I'm buying a property, inflation's at 8%, and my loan is at 3%. And so now there's a 5% discrepancy, like with the inflation and the reserve rate that I might be locked into. So I'm actually gaining 5% a year on cash because the rates so the interest rate's 3%, let's say, inflation's 8%. So my rate's locked in at 3%, inflation's 8%. And let's say as the years go by, it now compounds. So 10 years time, I'm still paying the same amount of cash back, but the dollar's being destroyed. So, I'm paying, let's say my payments are $500 a week, but then 10 years time, I'm still locked in the same rate. So they're paying $500 a week. They're still the same, but the money's being printed to shit. So I'm actually paying $500 back, but the price of a coffee is $20 instead of what it is now, which is $5. Then I've actually made, a ton of money. Like the inflation has just made me a bunch of profit. That's how the rich people get rich. That's how people that are wealthy get rich, because the inflation just keeps pushing them higher and higher. They've got another question from one of you lads. I saw a guy ask me, he's got 5K to invest. Where do I think that he should invest? And the best ROI for me is going to be investing in yourself. If you've only got 5K, I think that investing in yourself and investing in developing a high income skill. I don't know what you did to make that 5K. If it's an inheritance or something like that, or some sort of payout or something that's going to be difficult. But if you've managed to work to save that 5K, I would be trying to reinvest it into work, like reinvesting into getting a better skill. I think that if money is a hard thing for you, if you don't have a lot of money and your time's not very expensive, I think the best thing that a guy can do is learn from someone whose time is expensive for free. Maybe you're an employee, you work, but maybe there's a guy who's, let's say that you work in the tyre shop and then you're making $12 an hour just putting tyres on, but there's a manager there and he makes $50 an hour. I would be trying to get closer to him. I would be staying after work for free to try and learn more of his business. I would be running to get coffees and things like that for him. I would be showing a lot of respect to try and learn what it is that he knows. Like, how do I get groomed to be in the position that, and around the guy with the mindset that's on $50 an hour. Like, and then maybe he could have some ideas and some tips of how he progressed to that. Obviously, it's going to be around managing people, taking on more responsibility. But if 5K is all you have and you're adamant about investing it into a market, I guess you would look at crypto. Like, I wouldn't put 5K into one specific project, but I would probably start to dollar cost average into maybe like Ethereum, Bitcoin, things like that. I've obviously made tons of money in crypto. I mean, I don't know how much money I would have made, hundreds of X's plus in that specific field. But, 5K is not a lot of money. But crypto is still a market where, if you're studying the altcoins and things like that, 5K, you can make 500K from it. I mean, 100X's happen multiples every year. But it's extremely risky. If 5K is all you have, you might not be comfortable with the risk tolerance to invest in those sort of markets. So DCAing into a market does make sense. I think crypto is still the best market if that's all the money that you have. I wouldn't look at gold and silver and things like that because they're just simply too slow. I wouldn't look at tech equities and things like that because even though they're faster, it's still fuck all money. You need to take a higher amount of risk, but it's difficult if that's all the cash that you have. So the best return is going to be just getting your cash flow up. Developing a skill to get your money up so that you can DCA higher amounts into a market. I always have a thing for guys. I think they should invest 10 or 15% of their net every month into a market like crypto or something like that. I think that they should invest more into themselves. If they don't have a high income skill yet, I do. I think that they should reinvest into themselves until they develop that skill, and then they can focus on investing into the market. Because if you only have 5K and it would hurt you to lose all of that, I think that that's a missed trick. That you should be developing yourself and developing your high income skill. And that might be learning from the guy who's the most successful guy that you know, or the most well-paid guy that you know. And that can be learning for free. Just asking if he needs any tasks or jobs done or something like that. I know it's very hard for guys to humble themselves like that. it's much easier to just pretend that they don't give a shit, or that they're the man, or that it's harder to humble themselves and be like, I'm here to learn. I'm not fucking perfect, but I can do X and Y, and I can help you with that. I think that's a very hard thing for guys to do, but that's the biggest ROI. If you don't really know anything, and you've got 5K, congratulations on that, but you might not fucking know anything that's, amazing. You just develop that skill, which is going to be developed with humility and, opening with a fucking open mind and a fucking pure heart, and coming to the right people to learn. I think that's going to be the best ROI for you. Then I got another question, lads. We've changed the scenery out of the gym now. It's a bit crazy with the music. But I got to ask the question, is it difficult to get rich in a traditional business? So something that's not online. And to a degree, I would say yes. It depends on who you are. Guys can still get rich in brick and mortar businesses. Guys can still get rich like, engineers or tradesmen or things like that. It just depends. There's a difference between being rich where you're making good money a year, maybe you're making, 100, 150K a year, and actually building up to be wealthy, or building up to get a lifestyle where you can have a ton of liquid cash like every year. I think that leaning into tech products or doing things online is always going to be the best ROI now, just because you can scale it out a lot easier. You can hire labor or guys to work online for you from different countries that you can essentially sell their cheap labor to other countries. That's kind of a way to get rich, because you're selling their labor for them. You might be paying them $500 a month, and then you're actually making 10 or 20K a month from that labor, like the photos and things like that. So that's one way. It's just a very rudimental way that people can understand how people do sell the labor of people in the third world. Guys do it where they buy t-shirts and things like that. Nike and places like that have been doing that for an extremely long time. They sell that cheap labor offshore, so they monetize people who work on a low pay. But yeah, I think online it is much better. A tech product or something like that, guys can make millions of dollars selling PDFs and stuff like that online. I think that's quite crazy. But then at the same token, what value have you added to the world? There's still a lot more things that guys can do than just make a ton of money. I still think that the guy who might be, blue collar worker, maybe he's a plumber or something like that, he has more talents than a guy who's maybe just monetizing women or doing some bullshit job online, like selling courses or some crap like that. It's kind of selling something that's a bit of a fugazi product. It's kind of selling glitter or things like that, and then it's still a bullshit product. But that person who's got the tech product has managed to sell to a massive audience, so you can scale it a lot further than the guy who's kind of stuck trading his time for money. Like if you're a plumber, maybe you can eventually have your own team and things like that, but it's still kind of trading your time for money. You're still going to have to go through that route, do those 10 years or something like that before you can become a manager and eventually get your own team. Like you have to learn, you have to become competent, you have to get the connections. There's the guy who sells a tech product. He can kind of bullshit his way through a lot faster, and he might not be for everyone, but he only needs a small part of the world market to make great money. So I think guys need to look into the future. I do think that we're heading more into a sort of a tech world. I think we're going to be less bricks and mortar and things like that. I think that tech is going to continue to expand, and they're going to be the guys that get paid the most. I think eventually things will move into VR and things like that, and then it'll become even more tech. Guys will say tech valuations are overpriced now, but leading into the future, VR, AI, automation and things like that, I think that a lot of those bricks and mortar businesses and things like that will cease to exist. I think that with a lot of the riots and things like that, you have added liability now. If you're in the US or something like that and you have a shop, that's a central point of failure now. I think I was talking to a business owner last night, and he's from the US, and he has a multiple $1 million company, yes, but he was telling me how he has to be careful what he says online. He has suppliers and things like that, so if he says something that's sort of outlandish, and I said, oh, what's outlandish? Could you even say that you voted for Trump? That's it. And he said that he couldn't say that. He couldn't even say who he voted for, because he might lose suppliers, or he might lose, wholesalers or something like that. That sort of woke agenda, they might actually cancel him. He could lose customers, yes, but he could also lose suppliers and things like that, which matters more. So I think that when you're online with a tech product, you're a lot harder to cancel. But when you have a brick and mortar business or something like that, and you're relying on the public much more, you have a central point of failure. So I think a lot more of that into the future you have to be more careful of. That's my take.